The hum of the break room refrigerator wrapped around me like a thin frayed blanket as I stared down at Ethan's text thread glowing bright on my work phone. It was mid-August, the sticky, slow stretch of summer before Willow Creek High's doors creaked open for another school year, and my lunch hour had already been cut short by 3 rushed loan application reviews stacked on my desk. As senior underwriter at the regional bank, I spent every day untangling messy finances for strangers, but I'd never mastered untangling the financial mess Ethan dragged back into my life 3 years after our divorce. His latest message sat unread for 10 full minutes before I forced myself to tap open the screen. The words blurred at first, sharp and demanding, no casual greeting to soften the ask he'd been hinting at all week. $650 a month. For Mia's 2 boys, Jax and Brody, their travel soccer fees, private math tutoring, new cleats and backpacks for the upcoming semester. Ethan's text framed it as a simple favor, a small compromise for the sake of keeping everyone's kids happy, as if my hard-earned income existed to patch over the gaps in his second household's budget. My thumb hovered over the reply box, old guilt coiling tight in my chest the way it always did when he pulled this trick. For years during our marriage, I'd bent every budget line to cover his impulsive spending, the overpriced pickup truck he'd financed without talking to me, the weekend gambling trips he lied about until credit card statements spilled the truth. The divorce decree had drawn hard, uncrossable lines back then. All joint debt was assigned solely to Ethan. I retained full ownership of my paid-off townhouse, my separate savings, and Lila's untouched $529 college fund. There was 0 spousal maintenance written into the settlement, 0 legal obligation for me to support any child who wasn't my 16-year-old daughter. I'd fought for those boundaries through 6 grueling months of legal back and forth, and I wasn't about to erase them now for 2 boys who weren't mine. I typed my response slow and steady. No room for misinterpretation. I explained the divorce terms plain, noted my priority was protecting Lila's college savings, and told Ethan I couldn't and would send regular monthly cash to cover Mia's children's extracurricular costs. I hit send, locked my phone, and tried to focus on my turkey sandwich, certain that would be the end of the conversation for the day. 37 minutes later, my personal cell rang from an unknown local number. I just clocked out for the afternoon, grabbing my canvas tote bag from under my desk, when the vibration buzzed loud enough to draw glances from my cubicle neighbor. I hesitated, half expecting another harassing sales call, and swiped to answer without checking the caller ID. Mia's voice exploded through the speaker before I could say hello, shrill and unhinged, sharp with resentment that seeped through every syllable. She didn't waste time with talk, launching straight into accusations the second the line connected. She called me cold, selfish, wealthy beyond reason, while her sons scraped by on hand-me-dear, and the phrase that landed like a heavy stone straight to my ribs slipped out unfiltered. Financial. "You're withholding basic resources from minor children just to hold on to your money," she screamed over a faint background noise of a cartoon playing in "You have a fully paid house, a stable 6-figure job, and you refuse to lift a finger for kids who just want to play soccer and pass their masts. That's abuse, Elena. Plain and simple financial." I leaned against the bank's glass door, heat from the August sidewalk seeping through mats, and fought to keep my own level, despite the panic rising in my throat. I repeated the legal boundaries Ethan had agreed writing, reminded her that their household's financial struggles were not my responsibility, and told her I would end the call if she continued hurling untrue labels at me. Mia cut me off mid-sentence, ranting that Ethan had told her I'd walked away with nearly all their marital assets in the split, that I'd hoarded cash while he'd been left with nothing to build. The lie hung between us, a fabrication Ethan had clearly fed her to justify his endless request. I didn't walk away with anything that wasn't mine, separate property, married. Ethan's debt was his choice, his responsibility. I don't owe you or your cent. She spat a bitter retort, slammed the phone down so hard the line crackled and cut at mid-sentence. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, phone still to my ear, watching rush-hour traffic crawl past the parking lot, my hands trembling slightly against the thing. The weight of her accusation settled hones. A label that stuck, even when I knew it had no basis in reality. Financial abuser. The words echoed in my head, all in my car, looping over every stoplight on the 20-minute drive back to my quiet suburban. By the time I unlocked my front door, my text inbox was flooded with follow-up messages from Ethan, each one growing more desperate, guilt-tripping. He better reconsider. Said Mia was beside herself with stress over the boys' school costs, claimed Lila would understand if I set aside a little money. He even hinted he might cut back on his already partial child support payments for Lila if I would cooperate, a quiet threat disguised as a plea for compromise. I tossed my bag to the kitchen counter, poured a glass of cold lemonade, and dialed Clara, my best friend and divorce attorney, while scrolling through Ethan's. She picked up the second ring, her calm, grounded tone a sharp contrast to the chaos Mia and Ethan had noon. I recounted the entire exchange, Mia's screaming phone call, the unfair she'd thrown at me, Ethan's veiled threat about support. Clara without interruption, her quiet hums letting me get every frayed nerve out into the open before she spoke. "He's been lying to Mia about the divorce settlement for years," I said flatly. "That narrative about you walking away with all the money is his go-to manipulation tactic to get cash. Legally, you owe those kids anything. Her calling you a financial abuser is slander without a back it up. Document every text, every call log. Elena, this won't phone call. We wrapped up our call after a few more minutes of her walking me through what evidence save moving forward, and I set my phone down on the counter to breathe, hoping the worst of the up had passed for the night. I pulled a frozen from the freezer for dinner, mentally mapping out a quiet evening of laundry and a novel to unwind, ready to shut the 2 hours. That fragile piece shattered 10 minutes later, when a Facebook note to my screen. It was a tag from a parent I barely knew in Willow Creek PTA group, a link to a public post Mia had uploaded than 5 minutes prior. No names were spoken aloud in the caption, but the subject was impossible to miss. An anonymous with the ex-wife hoarding wealth, while young boys out school necessities. A woman using legal loopholes to financially harm vulnerable children. Mia's comment section already bloomed with sympathetic eyes from local mothers, dozens of them agreeing that whoever this woman was must be heartless and cruel. The town's gossip had already turned on me, fueled entirely by Mia's one-sided rage and captured lies. I stared at the screen, my throat tight with a mix of anger and helplessness, watching new supportive comments pop up every few seconds. Before I could close the app, a separate text alert flashed at the very top of my screen. An unfamiliar number I didn't recognize. The message was short, typed in messy, juvenile handwriting, preteen boy. My mom and stepdad keep saying don't pay for my soccer stuff. But they never talk about the money my real dad sends every month. Why do they lie about where the school cash comes from? The sender's area code matched Mia's neighborhood, and the name at the top of the unknown contact made my cheek light with quiet. Jax, oldest son. I read his question twice over, realizing Mia and Ethan's carefully constructed victim story had already started from the inside out. Long before I could gather a single piece of formal evidence to fight back, the quiet doubt of a child they'd sworn they were sacrificing every sat in my text inbox. Proof their entire narrative was built on hollow, convenient falsehoods. Outside my kitchen window, the summer sun dipped low behind the maple trees lining my street, paint streaks across the glass. I set the phone down slow, my mind raced through 100 uncertain futures. Mia's public post had lived on town-wide gossip. Ethan's threats loomed as child support payments, and now Mia's own son was reaching out with financial truth. Whatever calm, uncomplicated routine I'd built for myself and daughter after the divorce was gone, unraveled completely in August afternoon. Nothing would go back normal I'd grown used to. Not after this blow-up over back-to-school checks. Not after Mia branded me a financial abuser for daring to my legal boundaries. Monday morning's bank lobby buzzed with the usual rush of retirees cashing checks and parents depositing back-to-school savings, the air thick with the sharp, sweet scent of the citrus hand soap we kept by the teller counter. I'd barely settled into my underwriter station, my laptop open to a stack of refinance applications, when the front desk receptionist's voice crackled through the office intercom, soft with obvious discomfort. "Elena, there's a man named Ethan Reed here asking to speak with you. He said it's an urgent family matter." My stomach sank instantly. I'd spent Sunday evening replaying Mia's screaming phone call and Jax's confusing text over and over, certain Ethan would wait a day or two to cool off before reaching out again. I'd never imagined he'd show up unannounced at my workplace, a space where I was supposed to separate my messy personal life from my steady professional identity. I told the receptionist to send him to the small private consultation room off the lobby, grabbing a notebook and pen before I stepped out of my cubicle, aware of half a dozen curious coworker glances tracking my path. Ethan was leaning against the plastic table when I walked in, his work boots scuffing the linoleum floor. A faded construction company logo stretched across the front of his flannel shirt. His face was lined with frustration, the same desperate, wounded act he'd perfected during our marriage whenever he needed me to cave to his financial demand. He didn't bother with a greeting, cutting straight to the plea the second the door clicked shut behind me. "Can you just write me that monthly check? Just $650, Elena. It's not even a dent in what you make her. Mia hasn't slept a full night worrying about the boys' school bill, and it's tearing our marriage apart." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a rough, earnest murmur, like we were sharing some fragile family secret no one else in the bank needed to hear. "Think of Lila. She'd hate knowing her dad's new family is struggling this bad because you're clinging to every dollar you—" I set my notebook flat on the table between us, my tone calm and unwavering. No trace of the guilt he was trying to dig up from old wounds. I reminded him of the signed divorce decree resting in Clara's filing, the clear language that released me from any financial obligation to his step. I pointed out that Lila's college fund was locked away unchangeable, built dollar by dollar through overtime shifts and skipped vacations over 3 years, and I would not siphon from it to cover extracurricular costs for kids who had their own legal support system. Ethan's jaw tightened, the gentle pleading melting away into sharp irritation. He accused me of being bitter over of punishing Mia's boys for mistakes he'd made, and when I refused to budge, he raised his voice loud enough that I could hear the receptionist pause out. Before I could ask him to leave the bed, he tossed out the quiet threat he'd hinted at in Saturday's. If I wouldn't help cover Mia's house, he couldn't afford to keep sending Lila the full monthly child support check. "You can't afford to short our daughter's support because you overspent on your marriage," I said flatly, pushing my chair back. "That's not a bargaining chip you get to against me. This conversation is over. If you need to discuss anything co-parenting related for Lila, send me an email or a formal text that I can forward." He lingered a minute longer, staring me down like I'd personally robbed his stability, then stormed out of the consultation room without another word. As I returned to my cubicle mate leaned over the divider, her voice low and sympathetic, asking if everything all right at home. I brushed the question off with a vague work excuse, but I knew word fast. My ex-husband had come storming into the bank for cash, and half the front staff had watched the tense exchange unfold. By midday, my personal cell blew up with a string of long, rambling notes from Mia, each one layered with soft sobs and dramatic recounts of her son's disappointment over missing soccer tryouts and canceled during sessions. She framed herself as a single mother, stuck between a husband drowning in bills and a cruel ex hoarding wealth, every sentence crafted to twist my refusal into a deliberate. I saved every audio file to my cloud storage instruction, labeling the folder harassment evidence before muting me number entirely. I left the bank an hour early to stop at the grocery store, hoping to pick up dinner ingredients and escape the weight of the office gossip. The produce aisle was quiet until I rounded the corner cereal shelves, and Mia stepped out from behind a display of school supply backpacks, her cart loaded with cheap snack packs and boys' athletic socks. She blocked my path immediately, her voice sharp enough to draw stares from a pair of elderly shers a few feet away. "You're really going to let Ethan cut Lila's child support kids?" She crossed her arms over her chest, eyes glistening with tears. "Do you get some kind of satisfaction watching us scrape by while you drive a paid-off sedan and live with no mortgage? That financial abuse label isn't a throwaway insult. It's exactly boys." I stepped around her without engaging further, grabbing a box of pasta off the shelf and heading straight for the checkout line. Ignoring her shouted comments, Trey walked away. I loaded my groceries into car with shaking hands, already mentally drafting an email to Clara detailing the public confrontation at the supermarket, the workplace visit, and Mia's hour-long stack of guilt-tripping voice memos. That evening, once Lila got home from her part-summer lifeguard shift, I sat with her on her bedroom carpet. She folded swim towels, hesitant to drop Ethan's threat about child support on her with softening the blow first. She'd always been caught in the middle of our fights, and I hated dragging her into the financial mess Ethan's new family. When I told her Ethan was threatening to reduce his monthly payments if I wouldn't to Jackson Brody, her shoulders dropped, a familiar, tired sad on her face. "He's been saying stuff like that every time at his house on weekends," Lila mumbled, twisting between her fingers. "Mia corners me alone and asks to talk you into giving them money. She says you're being unfair, that Dad can catch up on bills without your help. Your money's for my college, but she just acts your side no matter what." Ached for my daughter. Stuck listening to Mia and Ethan's one complaints every other weekend. Forced to carry the weight of their budget fears when she was only 16, I pulled her into a quiet hug, promising her I'd never let Ethan cut her support through the court system. That her education would always be my top priority, no matter how much pressure the other pair piled on us. Not long after Lila headed upstairs to heat up the pasta I'd bought, my attorney name popped up on my phone. I answered quickly, walking out onto my back porch to escape the television inside the house, and Clara filled me in on the paperwork Ethan had filed that at Creek Family Court. He'd submitted a minor modification request, claiming my refusal to contribute to his blended family's child-related expenses created lasting emotional distress for Jackson Brody, and asking the judge to order me to provide regular financial aid for the boys. The weight of that news landed heavy in my chest. I'd thought the fight would stay contained to angry fools and workplace confrontations. But Ethan was dragging our private dispute into the legal system, putting my reputation on the line in front of a judge who'd soon hear Mia's financial abuse accusations firsthand. Clara warned me this was only the opening move of wear my boundaries down. That Mia had been messaging nearly in the PTA group all day, repeating her victim narrative to anyone who would listen. I stared out over my backyard fence at the line of oak trees separating my townhouse from the empty lot next door, my mind racing over every piece of evidence I still needed to gather to defend myself in court. They weren't just asking for money anymore. They were a formal public case against me, determined to paint me as a cruel, withholding ex-wife and the family court alike. The porch light flickered on above my head. A new text popped up from Clara. A short warm prickle down my spine. Stopping with court papers and gossip. "Mia told me she's got more space to share about you before the week is through, and she's not holding anything back to make people take her side." The faint blue glow of my desk lamp stretched across the kitchen table long after Lila had gone to bed, illuminating 3 years' worth of bank statements, child support receipts, and finalized divorce court documents spread neatly across the surface. The air felt still and taut in my townhouse, no longer the quiet, safe space I'd cherished since the divorce. Ethan's court modification filing had stripped away every last illusion that this conflict would fade with time, and I knew I could no longer afford to hide behind silence and peaceful compromise. For years, I'd chosen to swallow my frustration to keep co-parenting civil, to avoid town gossip, to spare Lila further heartache, but that passive approach had only emboldened Ethan and Mia to push harder, to weaponize my kindness as weakness. I spent the late nights sorting and cross-referencing every financial record tied to Ethan's child support obligations. Line by line, I logged each monthly payment, and the pattern emerged cold and undeniable. For 2 full years, Ethan had never once paid the full court-ordered amount for Lila's support. Some months he shorted me $50, other months $100 or more, always offering vague excuses about work slowdowns or unexpected household costs. I'd let it slide time and again, telling myself a partial payment was better than nothing, unwilling to drag our daughter through ugly court enforcement over relatively small sums. Now I realized that leniency had been a critical mistake. Ethan had grown accustomed to bending our legal agreement to suit his needs, convinced I would never hold him accountable. And that confidence was what made him bold enough to demand I fund his new family's expenses. By 6 o'clock the next morning, I had compiled a fully organized folder of dated receipts, bank transaction screenshots, and formal court order paperwork, every piece of evidence time-stamped and verified. I forwarded a digital copy to Clara before sunset, her quick reply confirming the records were ironclad proof of Ethan's consistent financial non-compliance. For the first time since Mia's angry phone, I didn't feel like a defendant fighting off unfair accusations. I felt grounded, prepared, and ready to defend my boundaries. The first test of that resolve came before I even left for work. On my way out there, I found a crumpled white note taped to my front porch railing, handwriting sharp and unforgiving. It accused me of prioritizing my own comfort over children's fears, repeating the familiar financial abuser rhetoric Mia had weaponized. There was no signature, but I knew exactly who left it. I peeled the note off the wood, and slipped it into my evidence. No longer stung by words, only grateful for another piece of documented harassment. School drop-off that morning was thick with quiet tension. Normally a casual, bustling space of parents chatting and kidding, the high school parking lot felt stiff and judgmental. Several mothers I'd spoken with dozens of times before avoided gaze, turning to huddle in small groups the second I walked. I heard quiet murmurs, caught fragments of phrases about selfish ex-wives and struck kids, and knew Mia's endless PTA messaging had fully seeped into the town's parents. The isolation. But I refused to shrink away or rush off to hide. I walked Lila to the school doors, squeezed her shoulder and held my, determined not to let their whispered judgments break me. Once back home during my mid-work break, I drafted a concise, unemotional text to Ethan, copied directly from Clara's lease. I restated the binding terms of our divorce decree, confirmed I had zero legal or moral obligation to support his stepchildren, and laid out clear boundaries for all future. Moving forward, every conversation would be limited to Lila's co-parenting needs, documented via text or email only. No more impromptu workplace visits, no more unregulated arguments, no more guilt-tripping demands for money. I sent the message with hesitation, locking my phone and returning to my work tasks with unshelf. That afternoon, Clara finalized a formal cease letter, certified and court-ready, outlining ongoing financial harassment, public defamation attempts, and uninvited personal harassment from both. The letter explicitly demanded an immediate end to all unsubstantiated accusations, workplace intrusions, and public smear campaigns, warning that continued behavior would result in formal legal sanctions. I signed and submitted the document official mailing, completing the first intentional defensive action of my fight back. This was no longer a petty back and forth over monthly extracurricular fees. It was a battle to protect my financial stability, reputation, and the safe, peaceful life I'd built for Lila after years of marital chaos. I was no longer the quiet ex-wife who bent over back to keep the peace. I was a mother defending her child's future, a woman protecting her boundaries. The irreversible shift landed minutes after the certified letter marked as delivered to Ethan's address. A coworker forwarded me a screenshot minutes later, taken from the closed Willow Creek PTA parent group. Mia had posted a photograph of my town's front exterior, bright, clean, modest, fully paid off, and paired caption. She wrote of spoiled luxury contrasted against her worn-out gear, of greedy refusal to help children in need, of a woman hiding behind legal technicalities to kids. Dozens of new sympathetic comments did in within minutes, solidifying the one-sided victim narrative she'd built. As I stared at the screenshot, my phone buzzed with a new incoming text from an unsaved number, X, again. This time his message was shorter, quieter, laced with childish confusion no adult manipulation could fully mask. My mom deleted all the comments where people asked about my dad's child support. Why is she hiding that money exists? Question hung on my screen, quiet but explosive. Mia and Ethan's polished, sympathetic lie was already rumbling from the inside. Their carefully constructed public victimhood was built entirely in secrecy. And I now knew exactly where to find the truth it all down. The screenshot of my townhouse lingered open on my phone long after I'd locked the screen. Mia's accusatory caption burned into my memory. For 3 years, I'd lived quietly in Willow Creek, keeping to myself, prioritizing work and Lila, never speaking poorly of Ethan or his new family even when they tested me. Yet Mia had weaponized my modesty as arrogance, turning my financial stability into proof of cruelty in the eyes of every parent in town. The quiet doubt in Jax's text refused to fade, and I knew I could no longer rely on passive legal defense alone. If they were going to paint me as a greedy liar publicly, I owed it to myself, and even to those boys, to uncover the full truth they were hiding. I waited until Lila left for her weekend shift at the local cafe before heading to the county clerk's office downtown. Public record searches were part of my daily skill set as a loan underwriter. I knew exactly how to navigate Ohio's state child support databases without overstepping legal boundaries or accessing private information. What I found in the certified court files stopped me cold. Mia received a court-ordered $720 each month in child support from Jackson Brody's biological father. The order was explicit, written in black official text. Every penny was designated solely for the children's school fees, athletic programs, tutoring, and educational supplies. It was active, current, and had been consistently paid on time for the past 8 years. All of Mia's sobbing stories about scrambling for soccer cleats and math tutoring money were manufactured. All of Ethan's desperate pleas for $650 a month were unnecessary. The funds they'd claimed were missing had been arriving steadily, month after month, all along. They had simply chosen not to mention. I sat in the empty clerk's viewing area, printing certified copies of the order, my hands steady, but my mind reeling. This was not a minor oversight or a temporary budget gap. This was a deliberate, calculated omission. They'd built their entire case against me on a lie by omission, framing me as a financial abuser for refusing to cover expenses that were already legally and fully funded by another source. I texted Clara the scanned copies immediately, and her reply came back within minutes, sharp and definitive. This is the crack in their entire narrative. This dismantles every claim they've made about you harming those kids. That evening, I overheard the first real fracture in Ethan and Mia's marriage through an accidental phone. Lila was on a routine weekend check-in with her dad, speakerphone on while she folded laundry, when Ethan forgot to mute him. His voice rose loud and cutting through the quiet room, arguing with Mia about hidden money and unspoken truths. I didn't lie to her. I just didn't tell her every Ethan. You wanted extra cash for new furniture out, not just the keys. Don't act like this is my... Mia's voice cracked, sharp trade. You told me Elena walked away with all the marital money and you said we had no other option but to ask for help. Now I find out we've had steady child support this entire time and you still pressured her. You made me look crazy. Lila's widened, and she quickly mute speaker, her face tight with belief. For the first time, she was hearing exactly what I'd suspected. Ethan had lied to Mia from the very beginning of their... He'd rewritten our divorce history to gain sympathy, framing himself as the wronged, broke ex-husband while painting me as self... Mia had bought every word of it, and in turn, she'd weaponized that false narrative to destroy my reputation across town. What struck me most was how perfectly self-serving their deception was. Mia got to play the struggling single mother community, collecting sympathy and clout, while Ethan got to siphon extra cash from me to cover his own poor choices. They'd each been a lie, until the truth started leaking out from their... By Sunday night, the tension between them was palpable. Ethan texted me a defensive, overly long message trying to downplay the child's discovery, claiming the money only covered basic food and clothes, and nothing extra for spring. It was a blatant fabrication, directly contradicting the court order's explicit educational and extracurricular stipulations. I saved the text, adding it to my grow evidence folder, no longer bothering to argue or correct him. Their denials were now just more proof of their deliberate. The once united front Ethan and Mia had presented to the world was officially crumbling. Where they'd previously aligned perfectly to attack me, they now turned quiet suspicion on each other. Mia began subtweeting vague references to broken trust and hidden truth social media, while Ethan grew bitter and irritable in every text exchange, no longer able to maintain his victim act. I knew the dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer just defending myself against two coordinated opponents. I was watching their own lies erode the foundation of their marriage from the inside out. The irreversible change settled but certain. I now held certified official proof that their entire financial abuse campaign was built. For the first time the conflict began, I possessed the leverage to flip every judgment that's against me. My quiet sense of dread didn't last long. Late Sunday evening, Lila called me in a shaky, upset tone, her height with stress. Mia had cornered her in the high school library that afternoon, pulling her away from her friend to confront her directly. She'd pressured Lila to convince me to pay son's expenses, demanding Lila her mom's cruelty, and threatened to spread rumors labeling Lila's own mother a neglectful, selfish parent, refusing. As Lila sniffled through the phone, I realized their crumbling marriage hadn't slowed against me at all. If anything, cornered and exposed, they were growing more desperate, and Mia was now willing to drag my 16-year-old daughter directly into the fight to get her way. The start of the new week carried none of the quiet relief I'd expected after unearthing Mia's hidden child support records. If anything, Ethan and Mia's behavior grew more frantic, as if they could sense their manufactured victim narrative fraying at the edges and were determined to shore it up before the whole town saw the truth. After learning Mia had cornered Lila in the school library, I tightened every boundary I had, limiting Ethan's contact to strictly scheduled co-parenting check-ins and keeping all communication text-only for documentation. I was done letting their unhinged desperation bleed into my daughter's life. While reviewing public financial records for Clara ahead of the court hearing, I stumbled onto a far uglier secret, one that explained Ethan's sudden, obsessive need for my money. As a senior loan underwriter, I'm trained to spot financial patterns others miss. I pulled state public record databases for outstanding judgments, delinquent consumer accounts, and active creditor claims under Ethan's full legal name. filtering results for the 3 years following our divorce. What surfaced was a staggering trail of self-inflicted debt, stacked high and entirely unconnected to Mia's children or household necessities. Ethan had accumulated $38,000 in unsecured post-divorce debt. Court records detailed every line item, maxed out personal credit card, delinquent high-interest vehicle loans for his brand-new luxury pickup, unpaid urgent care medical bills he'd never disclosed to me, and even documented small-stakes gambling losses submitted as part of a creditor's claim. None of it stemmed from school fees, household rent, or his new family's basic needs. Every dollar of that crushing balance came from reckless, impulsive spending, choices he'd hidden behind a carefully crafted mask of financial hardship. The deeper I dug, the clearer his manipulation became. Ethan had never asked me for money to support Jackson. He'd used the boys as a sympathetic, marketable excuse to beg for cash he needed to stall his own collapsing financial. He'd let Mia believe their struggles stemmed from insufficient income and my supposed, all while he burned through thousands on purchases he could not afford. He'd lied to his new wife just as easily as he'd lied to me during our marriage, shifting blame for his failures onto me to preserve his own ego and avoid accountability. I scheduled an early evening meeting with Clara at her downtown office, spreading the printed judgments and delinquency notices across her conference table. She scanned each page with a sharp practice, leaning back in her chair with a quiet, knowing, "This changes everything," said, tapping the gambling debt. "His entire legal claim is based on the lie that he's struggling to support his blended. These records prove his crisis is self-aided. He's not desperate for his kids. He's desperate to avoid wagement." Clara explained the timeline. Creditors had already filed formal suits, and the court was weeks away from ordering automatic wage withholding on Ethan's construction. If happened, his take-home income would shrink dramatically, ruining the flexible spending lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to. Panicked and out of options, he'd turned to the only person he'd ever been able to exploit. That Tuesday night, I attended the local youth soccer game at the town's public sport complex, where Jack's and Brody's team. I'd gone simply to pick Isla, who'd volunteered to help with game days, but I couldn't help watching Mia and Ethan from across their body language was tense, fractured, no longer the unified, loving blended family they portrayed. Mia sat stiffly apart from Ethan, her gaze distant, skeptical, while Ethan fidgeted constantly, checking his phone for creditor alerts. It was obvious Mia had begun to piece together the truth. She knew about her own undisclosed child support now, and Ethan's frantic energy spoke of mounting secrets he could know. The victim story that had bonded them, replaced by quiet resentment. She'd married a man who'd manipulated her from day one, using her children as pawns to cover his own financial ruin. That night, Lila and I talked through old memories. She recalled how Ethan had always come up short on bills their marriage, how he'd lied about small expense too, how he'd always expected me to clean up his finances. We both realized nothing had changed worse. He'd simply found a new family to absorb his chaos, and a new excuse to demand my money. 24 hours later, Clara forwarded me an anonymous court copy that finalized every loose thread. An official creditor summons had been filed and served to Ethan's residential address, formalizing the pending garnishment. The document was dated the exact same week Ethan had first texted me demanding $650 a month. His timing coincidence. He hadn't cared about studies or tutoring. He'd needed quick cash to stall the court process and save himself financial ruin. The irreversible shift, certain. I now possessed definitive proof that Ethan's entire campaign against me was rooted in fraud and self-preservation. Concern. Every accusation, financial abuse, desperate plea, every veiled threat against Lila's child support had been a calculated distraction from her own crippling debt. The final crack came in a late-night text from Clara, foreboding. She'd confirmed Mia had started asking mutuals his quiet, pointed questions about each stories. Privately doubting told her. Ethan's fake hardship was exposed on paper. His new wife no longer fully believed him. His creditors were closing in fast. Cornered and terrified of losing everything, he had nothing left to lose, and every reason to fight harder than ever to destroy me before the full truth came first. By the start of the next week, Willow Creek's quiet suburban gossip machine had fully turned against me, and Mia was not done fueling it. With Ethan's financial secrets beginning to unravel behind closed doors, she doubled down on her public victim narrative, seemingly determined to destroy my reputation before anyone could uncover the truth about her hidden child support and Ethan's mountain of debt. She could no longer win privately through manipulation, so she set out to win publicly by tearing me apart entirely. I felt the shift the second I walked into work Monday morning. The usual friendly office chatter faded the moment I stepped into the break room. Coworkers who once stopped to chat about weekend plans now ducked their heads, scrolling quietly on their phones or busying themselves with coffee mugs and paperwork. The air hummed with unspoken judgment, and I knew exactly what was happening. Mia had spent every night curating and spreading a selectively edited version of our conflict across every local parent group and neighborhood chat. Her tactic was calculated and cruel. She stopped posting full lies and started posting fractured, out-of-context truth. She uploaded screenshots of only my firm refusal text, cropped clean of Ethan's threat, his demand, and his veiled child support retaliation. She omitted her own steady child support income, erased Ethan's debt crisis, and framed my legal boundary setting as cold, unprovoked cruelty toward innocent kids. To make it worse, she deleted every skeptical comment, every parent who asked if she had other financial resources, every question that threatened her victim image. She curated her comment section into a wall of unified outrage, letting strangers praise her as a brave, struggling mother while painting me as a bitter, vengeful ex-wife who used money to punish a blended family. The social spillover leaked into every corner of my life. At the grocery store, parents I'd known for years crossed the aisle to avoid me. At school drop-off, once warm acquaintances turned their backs mid-conversation. Even my bank's front desk staff grew stiff and receiving passive-aggressive messages from local community members, questioning why the branch employed someone accused of child financial abuse. For the first time since the divorce, I felt genuinely isolated. I was used to handling conflict quietly, used to resolving problems with paperwork and pins, not viral suburban naming. My soft approach to co-parenting and conflict avoidance had always been but now it was being weaponized as proof. People assumed my silence was my boundaries weed, my refusal to cave was malice. I called Clara in the morning, my voice tighter than I wanted to be, and confessed how hollow and defeated. I'd spent 3 years rebuilding a stable, honest life for Lila, only to have it torn down in weeks by manufacturers. Clara's response was grounded and unflinching. She walked me through Ohio's defamation and cyber harassment statutes, explaining that curated, misleading social media posts intended to harm professional and personal reputation qualified as actionable slander. She instructed me to pause my emotional response and start archiving every edited screenshot, every cold interaction, every whispered rumor, every deleted comment thread I could recover from mutual friends. I spent my entire lunch break building a new evidence folder dedicated solely to social media harm. I saved every post, every text, every sympathetic comment Mia had cultivated. I logged every public snub, every avoided glance, every awkward voice whisper. First time, I stopped trying to win the town's approval and started documenting how thoroughly Mia was. That evening, I hit my lowest point of the entire conflict. Lila came home quiet, drawn, admitting that classmates had seen the parent group posts and mocked her for cruel mom. She'd defend me, to explain the divorce boundaries and ethylation. But the rumors had already sunk in too deep. Hearing my daughter suffer social humiliation for choices I'd made to protect our family broke something in me. I sat on the living room couch long after Lila went to sleep, staring at the dark backyard, wrestling with old, useless guilt. For a moment, I wondered if I should just pay the $600 a month, if swallowing my boundaries would quiet the storm and give my daughter peace. But I quickly put the weakness away. Giving in wouldn't harassment. It would prove to Ethan and Mia that shaming worked, that they could break my boundaries anytime they wanted by turning me. Just as I started to break through the low point, my phone buzzed with an urgent after-hour Clara. Her tone was sharp, urgent, no routine. Mia just filed a civil harassment claim against you, she said quickly. She's alleging you've been stalking her family, digging into their private finances to harass them, and causing severe emotional distress in her children. She's framing your legal evidence gathering as targeted. The news landed like a physical blow. Up until now, everything had been external. Gossip, social media smear campaigns, wordness. But this was official, legal, documented. Mia was flipping the script entirely, turning my self-defense into accusation against me. The irreversible was complete. I was no longer just defending my finances. I was now a formally named defendant in a harassment case, fighting to clear my name while Ethan and Mia continued to hide their own lies and debt crisis behind fake victimhood. As I stared at the blank, dim living room, one brutal truth settled in my bones. They weren't just to take my money anymore, trying to take everything. My career credibility, my community, my peace, and protect Lila. And they'd burned every bridge, destroyed every soft alliance, and weaponized every suburban social rule to do it. The only way out now was to fight back with the full, unvarnished truth. After Mia filed her false harassment claim, I stopped fighting defensively. For weeks, I'd reacted to every move they made, deleting rumors, correcting misjudgments, and quietly enduring town gossip while building my case behind the scenes. But their decision to legally frame my evidence gathering as stalking crossed a line I could no longer tolerate. They wanted a public fight? I would give them one, rooted entirely in official records, unarguable facts, and the truth they'd spent months hiding. Clara and I spent the night refining a single bulletproof public statement. We avoided emotional outbursts, petty retorts, or angry accusations. Instead, we structured every word around court-certified documents, redacted only to protect minor children's privacy. We attached scanned copies of Mia's monthly child support order, explicitly listing educational and extracurricular coverage for Jackson Brody. We included timestamps proving those payments had arrived on time, every month, for years. Most importantly, we added a one-page summary of Ethan's delinquent debt record, clarifying that his urgent financial needs were tied to personal reckless spending, not his stepchildren's school costs. Early the next morning, I posted the full attorney-approved document to the same Willow Creek PTA parent group where Mia had seeded every rumor. I did not name her directly, I did not attack her character, and I did not beg for public sympathy. I simply laid out the complete, verified timeline. The original financial demand, my legal boundary refusal, the hidden child support income, and Ethan's undisclosed personal debt crisis. My closing line was calm and unshakable. I have never owed support for non-biological children. I have never harassed any. I have only defended myself and my daughter from manufactured accusations and financial exploitation. The group went silent for a full 10 minutes after the post went live. Then the tide shifted violently and irreversibly. Parents who'd spent weeks commenting on Mia's posts began replying with stunned apologies. Local mothers who'd avoided me at drop-off typed long messages, admitting they'd only heard one side of the story, that they'd blindly believed the poor, struggling mom narrative without questioning the missing content. Several members shared that they'd suspected something was off all along. Mia's inconsistent stories, her refusal to answer questions about alternate income, her overly aggressive need to paint herself as a victim. Within an hour, every sympathetic comment on Mia's old posts was buried under new realization. The town's gossip engine reversed course entirely. People were no longer questioning Hector. They were questioning why Mia and Ethan had lied so aggressively, and why they'd tried to destroy a stranger's reputation to cover their own financial. I felt the difference in real time out in public that afternoon. I stopped at the neighborhood coffee shop after work, and two PTA moms who'd previously ignored me walked over to my register line to apologize face-to-face. They admitted Mia had privately DM'd dozens of parents to paint me as dangerous and cruel, actively silencing any opposing perspective to control the group narrative. By evening, Mia had deleted every single one of her accusatory social media posts. She locked her profile, disabled comments, and vanished entirely from the local parent community online. Her months-long smear campaign collapsed in a single day, dismantled by nothing but unfiltered document. The victim persona she'd clung to for social clout gone, exposed as a hollow performance. The power dynamic between us had flipped completely. For the first time since the conflict began, Ethan and Mia were no longer the sympathetic. They were the deceptive manipulators, and I was the woman who'd been unfairly targeted for setting legal boundaries. But their loss of public sympathy only made Ethan. Just after dark, long after the neighborhood streets turned on, a sharp, aggressive knock pounded again. I peeked through the side window and saw Ethan stand on my porch, his face flushed with rage, his shoulders rigid. I hesitated before unlocking the deadbolt, keeping the chain latched as I pulled it. He didn't wait for an invite to explode. "You ruined everything," he snarled, voice unhinged. "You ruined my reputation in this town. You ruined my marriage. You turned everyone against us. This is your fault, all of it." My tone steady, refusing to match his anger. "I only posted records, Ethan. You ruined your own life with..." He leaned closer to the door, his eyes beaming with threat, every ounce of his face. "You think this is over? You think posting a few papers fixes everything? If you don't pull all this back, if you don't drop every piece of evidence against me, I'm dragging Lila into this court fight. You want to play dirty? I'll make sure our daughter pays." The words hung coldly in the night air, a blatant, unvarnished threat against my child to force my compliance. This was the irreversible turning point. No longer was this a dispute over monthly school fees or community gossip. Ethan had officially weaponized my daughter's security to his own collapsing life. Lost public support, lost sympathetic narrative, the story. And now he was willing to hurt Lila to over me. I shut the door firmly in his face, locking every deadbolt tight, my hands steady but my heart racing. The truth had flipped public opinion, broken their smear campaign, and stripped them of everything they'd held. But cornered, exposed, and humiliated, Ethan waiting for money. He was fighting to survive, and he was ready to burn everything I loved down to do it. Ethan's threat to drag Lila into court hung over my entire night, sharp and unshakable. I'd dealt with his manipulation, his lies, and his financial recklessness for years, but crossing the line to weaponize our daughter's peace changed every rule of the game. I refused to let Lila become collateral damage for his crumbling marriage and self-inflicted debt, so I contacted Clara first thing the next morning to file an emergency child support enforcement motion. Clara wasted no time drafting the paperwork, framing Ethan's years of underpaid support and recent retaliatory threats as willful contempt of the original divorce decree. She explained that using child support as leverage to coerce unrelated financial favors was illegal in Ohio, and it would weigh heavily in front of the family court judge. For the first time, I was not just defending myself against their false claims, I was pressing formal consequences for Ethan's consistent, long-term financial neglect of Lila. While we finalized the court documents, the quiet collapse of Ethan and Mia's marriage exploded into full view. My neighbor sent me a text mid-morning, describing a screaming fight that had erupted at their rental house the night after Ethan's porch visit. Doors had slammed, voices had carried down the street, and their once perfect blended family facade had shattered completely for anyone within earshot. The final crack came from Mia herself. Having seen the public record, having learned Ethan knew about her child support all along, and having realized he'd used her sons as a pawn to cover his personal gambling and loan debts, she'd lost every last reason to defend him. Mia finally understood the full scope of his deception. He had never cared about her boy's school fee. He'd never been desperate to support his family. He'd just needed a sympathetic story to manipulate me into bailing him out of his own bad choices, and he'd lied to his own wife to pull it off. The victim narrative they'd built together was nothing more than a one-man con, and Mia had been an unwitting co-star. The fallout was immediate and irreversible. Mia withdrew every dollar of her personal savings from their joint household bank account, closing the shared balance entirely. She stopped defending Ethan online, stopped making excuses for his missed payments, and stopped shielding him from the consequences of his own mistakes. For the first time since I'd met her, she saw me not as a cruel financial abuser, but as another person Ethan had lied to and exploited. That afternoon's school exchange was colder and tenser than it had ever. Lila came home from her weekend with Ethan pale and unsettled, refusing to even speak to him through the car window when he dropped. She told me Ethan had spent the entire drive home ranting about me ruining him, while Mia stayed silent in the passenger seat, no longer joining in his blame or trying to guilt trip the unified front. All that remained was resentment, betrayal, and mutual distrust. Lila told me flatly she no longer wanted to spend unsupervised time at their house, and I updated our co-parenting agreement guideline writing, notifying Ethan that all future exchanges would happen in public parking lots with witness visibility, no exceptions. I would not let my daughter stay in a household unraveling from anger, secrets, and desperate retaliation. By evening, Clara called with game-changing court news. The family court clerk had consolidated all 3 open cases into a single hearing: Ethan's financial modification request, Mia's civil harassment claim, and my emergency child support enforcement motion would all be heard before the same judge, same day, in one single final courtroom session the following week. All cards were on the table. There was no more dragging disputes, no more gossip, no more incremental harassment. Every lie, threat, every rumor, every unpaid dollar of child support would be laid out in front of a neutral judge with full legal authority to issue binding, permanent rulings. In the hour before the hearing, Ethan and Mia's last bargaining chip crumbled completely. Mia privately messaged Clara's office, confirming she was prepared to testify truthfully under Ethan's lies about the divorce settlement, his deliberate omission of her child support income, his fabricated hardship narrative, and his threats to retaliate. She was no him. She was ready for truth. The irreversible absolute. Ethan had lost life's loyalty, lost sympathy, lost legal leverage, and lost his ability to use his blended family as at. Every weapon he'd wielded against me was broken, every exposed, every lie unraveled. He stood alone, with nothing left to rely on but empty threats and exhausted resentment. As I organized my full evidence that night, bank records, court orders, social media screenshots, threat logs, and years of child discrepancies, I knew the final show was inevitable. After months of defending myself from endless attacks, the power was no hands. It was mine, and it belonged to the unvarnished truth they'd spent so long trying to bury. The only question left was not whether they would lose, but how severe the judge's final consequences would be for every lie and manipulation they'd committed. The hum of overhead fluorescent lights filled the small Willow Creek family courtroom as I settled onto a wooden bench beside Clara, every folder of evidence stacked neatly at my feet. My hands stayed steady where they rested in my lap, but my pulse thrummed hard against my ribs, knowing every hidden lie Ethan and Mia had nurtured for months would be laid bare before Judge Hale that morning. Down the aisle, Ethan sat rigid and hunched in a cheap blazer, his jaw tight, while Mia kept several empty seats between them, her gaze fixed on the linoleum floor rather than glancing his way. The chasm of betrayal between them was plain for everyone in the room to see, no performative unity left to hide behind. The judge called the consolidated docket to order without delay, running through the 3 intertwined cases one by one. Ethan's request to force me into monthly financial support for Jackson Brody, Mia's civil harassment complaint against me, and my emergency motion to collect 2 years of unpaid child support for Lila. Ethan went first, taking the witness stand with the same wounded, wronged tone he'd used in every text and argument over the summer. He repeated his familiar script, painting me as a wealthy, bitter ex-wife hoarding asset, while his blended children suffered without basic extracurricular opportunities. He claimed Mia's steady child support only covered bare necessities, insisted his own debt was an unexpected accident, and doubled down on labeling my public record sharing as targeted harassment toward his family. Judge Hale listened quietly, scribbling short notes on his pad, then shifted his gaze to the stack of certified documents Clara set before the bench. Mia's 8-year child support court order, line items explicitly earmarked for sports fees and tutoring, dated bank records proving consistent monthly deposits from the boy's biological father. The judge held up the paperwork for Ethan to see, his voice calm but sharp with skepticism. Ethan's rehearsed story stuttered apart instantly. He stumbled over half-truths, shifting blame to Mia for failing to mention the ignoring the clear proof he'd known about the payments all along yet still demanded cash from. Next, Mia was called to testify. She climbed to the stand slowly, her voice soft but unflinching when she swore to tell the whole truth. No more omissions or excuses to protect. Under cross-examination from she laid out every manipulation step by how Ethan had lied to her about our divorce set, claiming I'd walked away with all marital wealth and left him destitute. How he'd pushed her to make hostile calls and post accusatory social media content to pressure me for money. How he'd concealed his $38,000 in person, using her sons as a sympathetic cover for his reckless truck loans and gambling losses. She admitted labeling me a financial abuser had been cruel and that she deleted all critical comments on her parent group posts to craft a one-sided victim narrative, and that filing the harassment claim against me had been Ethan's idea, a desperate ploy to distract everyone from his own financial ruin. When the judge pressed her on why she'd stayed complicit for long, Mia's throat tightened. She said she'd trusted Ethan's version of events blindly, too ashamed to question his word in front of their mutual friends, and terrified of destabilizing the home she'd built. By the time she was speaking, every piece of Ethan's constructed victimhood had crumbled entirely on the public record. I took the witness stand last, and I spoke only in plain, verifiable facts. No anger, no dramas. I walked the judge through the finalized divorce decree that released me from any obligation to support non-biological children. Presented 2 full years of bank statements showing Ethan's consistent underpayment of Lila's support, and submitted copies of Ethan's creditor summonses, proving his urgent financial crisis stemmed from his own choices, not household needs. I recounted the uninvited place visit, the anonymous threatening notes on the porch, Mia's public social media defamation, and Ethan's direct threat to drag her into court as retaliation for me sharing official records. Clara wrapped her legal argument by citing Ohio's statutes against financial harassment and retaliatory childholding, framing every action Ethan and Mia had taken as a coordinated campaign to exploit and slander me for personal financial gain. Judge Hale spent 10 quiet minutes reviewing every exhibit spread across his bench before delivering ending rulings, each verdict clear and he fully dismissed Ethan's request to order me to contribute financially to Brody, stating there existed zero legal or equitable grounds to force a non-biological parent to fund unrelated children's expenses. Mia's civil harassment claim was thrown in its entirety, the judge ruling my public release of redacted court records constituted protected self-defense against sustained defamation, not stalking emotional harm. The heaviest penalty, Ethan. He was ordered to pay all 2 years of delinquent back child support for Lila, due in full within calendar days, with automatic wage garnishment scheduled to activate. He missed the deadline. A formal permanent restraining order was issued against Ethan and Mia, barring uninvited visits to home or workplace, hostile public accusations, and any attempt to pressure or harass me or Lila over finances in the future. Silence settled thick over the courtroom as the judge closed the docket. All outside on the courthouse concrete steps, Mia pulled Ethan aside away from the rest of us, pressing a folded stack of separation papers into his hesitation. Her voice carried just loud enough for me to overhear, cold and final after months of tangled lies and resentment. She told him she would file for fault of the end of the month, that she could no longer build a life with someone who'd manipulated her, children as pawns, and destroyed their family's reputation to cover his own failures. She warned him she would return to testify against him without hesitation if he ever attempted any further harassment of my daughter. Ethan stared down at the separate papers in his palms, his drained of all color, every last scrap of leverage, sympathy, and power stripped away in a single inside that courtroom. The fight he'd started to dig himself out of debt only cost him his marriage, his reputation, and thousands in back child support he could not afford to pay. Every secret he'd buried, every accusation he'd thrown, every threat he'd made had unraveled completely when the full truth was laid out before a judge. Early September's soft golden sunlight spilled over Willow Creek High's front lawn for back-to-school night, the exact same seasonal setting that had ignited every ugly conflict just 1 month prior. I lingered near the soccer field bleachers with a paper cup of warm coffee, watching Lila laugh as she chatted with her friends, no longer flinching or hunching her shoulders when other parents glanced our way. The weight of Mia's slander, Ethan's threats, and the weeks of court tension hadn't vanished entirely, but it had stopped clinging to every breath I took. This was the quiet closure I'd spent months fighting to reach. A week after the courtroom ruling, Ethan's mandatory back child support deposit hit my checking account in one lump transfer. I logged into my online banking and split the money without hesitation. Most of it transferred straight into Lila's locked 529 college savings fund, where it would sit untouched for her freshman tuition, and a smaller portion moved into a brand new personal savings account I'd opened only for myself. Massages, weekend day trips, small gentle luxuries I'd always denied myself during my marriage. Too busy patching together Ethan's endless financial messes to prioritize my own peace. I met Clara for coffee downtown a few days later to wrap up all legal loose ends, sliding the court's final signed order across the table between us. She folded the paperwork into her firm's filing cabinet with a quiet, relieved smile, noting that Mia had already submitted her formal divorce filing against Ethan the previous week. Word had trickled through town that Mia signed a short-term lease on a 2-bedroom apartment closer to her son's elementary school, relying solely on her preschool aid wages and the steady child support from the boy's biological father, no longer tied to Ethan's volatile spending or mountain of unpaid debt. Clara also filled me in on Ethan's consequences beyond the child support. His construction employer had received the official wage garnishment paperwork from his creditor, meaning a fixed chunk of every paycheck would automatically go toward paying off his $38,000 in delinquent loans and gambling losses for years to come. With his marriage dissolved, his community reputation ruined, and no one left willing to bail him out of his self-made financial, he had no more shortcuts or manipulation tactics to lean on. He was forced to face the full weight of every reckless choice he'd hidden for years. That evening, Lila and I curled up on my living room couch after the TV muted in the background as we talked through everything that had happened over the She admitted she'd spent weeks terrified I'd cave to Ethan and Mia's demands, scared her college money would disappear to cover soccer cleats she already knew were fully funded by Mia's other child support. She apologized for ever doubting my heart, but I pulled her close and told her there was nothing to Being caught between two warring households at 16 was an impossible, and none of the chaos had ever been her. We talked about balance, about the difference between kindness and self-sacrifice, about how protecting your own stability was never selfish rule. For the first time, Lila fully understood why I'd refused to send Ethan monthly, not out of bitterness toward her sisters, but because I could not let another person's bad financial decisions dismantle the safe, secure life we'd spent 3 years building together. Over the following weeks, the town's quiet judgment melted away entirely. Parents who'd avoided me in grocery store aisles stopped by to apologize, many sharing that they'd reached out to Mia after the court documents related and learned the full truth of her hidden child support and Ethan's secret debt. The PTA group removed all of Mia's old, accusatory posts early, and the whispers that had followed everywhere faded into nothing. My co-workers at the bank dropped the stiff, formal distance they'd kept during the storm, falling back into easy, casual lunch break conversations like nothing had ever shifted between us. I updated my co-parenting guidelines one time, drafting a clear written set of financial boundaries that would stand permanent for all future interactions. All communication was restricted to scheduled text only, limited exclusively to Lila's school, medical, and activity plans. No more visits, no more emotional tripping, no more demands for money unrelated to our daughter's court support. The restraining order issued by Judge Hale reinforced every line I'd written, a legal safety net to ensure I would never again be dragged into Ethan's finance. I walked back out to the soccer bleachers as dusk settled over school grounds, sipping my coffee and watching Jax and Brody run drills across. Mia stood alone on the far side of the field, her gaze never toward me, quiet and focused on her boys without the desperate need for sympathy or extra cash that had driven every one of her cruel choice over the summer. There was no malice between us, only a shared recognition that we'd both been trapped by Ethan's lies, each of us manipulated into turning against one another. I didn't need closure from Mia or Ethan to move forward. My peace didn't depend on their apology or regret. It rested in the unshakable boundaries I'd established, the protected future I heard for Lila, and the quiet truth I'd refused from anyone. I did not owe anyone my money, my stability, or my peace to make up for their poor choices. The summer's chaos had left faint scars, small reminders of how quickly manufactured accusations and hidden lies could unravel a quiet life. But as I watched Lila wade across the field, grinning without a trace of the stress that had weighed her all August, I understood the most vital lesson I'd spent years learning. Setting hard, honest boundaries isn't financial abuse, it's self-respect. And that was enough to build a whole new, uncomplicated life.